Bienvenidos a Gracias por tu servicio, el podcast con la intención de hablar sobre los temas relevantes de los militares, veteranos y veteranas de Puerto Rico. En el episodio de hoy estaremos hablando con Alexandria Carvalho del Shepherd Center. Bienvenido a un nuevo episodio de Gracias por tu servicio. En el episodio de hoy estaremos hablando con Alexandria Carvalho de Shepherd Center. Pero antes de comenzar, quiero presentar a la compañera Nimari Colón. Saludos, Colón.
Saludos Ortiz, hola, hola. Hoy voy a sacar el inglés a pasear, no te voy a mentir. No, pero fuera de relajo, ¿verdad? No las cosas en serio, pues este tema es súper importante porque a veces es un tema que no lo tomamos en consideración y pues lamentablemente que hay personas que viven con este injury y a veces no lo saben o no lo reconocen, porque a veces uno vive, ¿verdad? En esta vida con tanto estrés, hay unos síntomas que son bien comunes, bien parecidos a lo que son otras condiciones. Entonces es bien importante poder reconocer si tenemos estos síntomas, pues sacar unos momentitos para recapitular y repasar y hablar con su primario, a ver qué se puede hacer.
No, definitivamente, estoy de acuerdo. Este es un tema que a veces no se diagnostica como se supone que se diagnostique y muchas personas tienden a recibir el tratamiento no adecuado para él y entonces pues se le atrasa el proceso de sanación. Así que definitivamente esto es un episodio que deberían prestar atención. También queremos recordarle que al final de nuestra conversación con Alexandria de Shepherd Clinic, vamos a estar presentando el segmento de nuestras amigas de The Therapy Coffee, Aromas que Sanan. Y no se nos puede quedar hablar de nuestro patrocinador de la temporada 3, Buff Bear. Visiten a buffbearpr.com para que vean los estilos que está redefiniendo la moda del fitness. Es importante señalar que marzo también es el mes de la concientización de los TBIs, lo cual sigue siendo una condición que, aunque afecta a una gran cantidad de personas en el mundo, a menudo permanece en la sombra de la conciencia pública. Por eso decidimos traerle este tema que está llena de información válida que puede ayudar a alguien que ha sido afectado por esta condición, al igual que sus familiares. Our guest for this episode is Alexandria Carvalho from Shepherd Center. Alexandria enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps in 2007 as a landing support specialist, aka logistics of personnel and gear via air, land, and sea. After 6 years of service, she attended U.S. Marine Corps training to become a motor transport mechanic. In 2014, she served on active duty orders with the Wounded Warrior Battalion East as a motor transport chief and deputy family readiness officer, providing resources to wounded, ill, and injured Marines and families until August 2016. Alexandria attended college at Cleveland State University and graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Health Sciences with a minor in psychology and a certificate in communication, culture, and health. In 2018, she moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and began working in the veteran nonprofit community for the Warrior Alliance as a non-clinical case manager. During this time, she continued to serve in the Marine Corps, facilitating Marine Corps IRR throughout the Southeast United States. Alexandria also served as the District Injured Support Coordinator with the Marine Corps Wounded Warrior Regiment, providing transition assistance to the wounded, ill, and injured Marine veterans who resided in the states of Georgia, South Carolina, and Alabama. In 2023, she began to serve as an outreach coordinator for the Shepherd Center's Share Military Initiative Traumatic Brain Injury Program. With almost 17 years of service, Alexandria continues to serve in the Marine Corps Reserves as a staff sergeant with Recruiting Station Atlanta, 6th Marine Corps District, supporting recruiting efforts in the Southeast United States. She lives with her fiancé outside Atlanta, Georgia, with their 3 dogs and 2 cats. Her fiancé is an active duty Marine who serves as a prior service recruiter. He attended the Share Military Initiative TBI program last year and graduated in August 2023. This past February, Alexandria and I met at the IW Silky's Hike, where she shared her genuine passion for helping Marines that have experienced traumatic brain injuries. Her enthusiasm was so evident that I invited her to our podcast, and she graciously accepted. So, with that all said, thanks for being here with us, Alexandria.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's an honor.
Before we go into it, I wanted to share, you told me that you were going to be attending the Silky's Hike in Atlanta?
Yes, I am. Yeah, June 22nd for that one. I'm looking forward to it, along with a few others that I've been looking at.
Okay, yeah, I think that they're doing pretty good because I've seen some of the pictures from Florida and other places, and apparently a lot of people are motivated to do their hikes this year. Hopefully, Atlanta could do the same. And, for our listeners in that area, please support these type of events because they're very important to our veteran community. And, that's how we met, and that's how Alexandria is here. So we continue to build networks for all our veterans across the world. So, first of all, when you talk about the history of Shepherd Center Rehab Hospital and Share?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand the hospital that our program is through, just because they truly are so invaluable, especially within the Southeast. So the Shepherd Center is a spinal cord injury and brain injury rehab hospital. It's one of two in the nation that only focuses on spinal cord injury and brain injury, with the other being in Colorado. And so they're huge when it comes to research and being at the forefront of everything as far as spinal cord injury and brain injury rehabilitation treatment. We also have a multiple sclerosis clinic as well. And then we have an outpatient clinic for pain and neurology and wound. But really how it started is the important part. So in the 70s, Harold and Alana Shepherd had their son had graduated college, and he wasn't quite sure what he wanted to do. And so he decided to go on a trip with some friends, and they went down to Brazil. So they're in Brazil, they're on the beach, they're having a great day, enjoying the warm weather, the beautiful ocean, and they went out for a swim in the ocean and decided to do some body surfing. During this, he found a wave that slammed him, and when he kind of came to, he realized that he couldn't move, and later discovered that he was paralyzed from the neck down. And so through that paralysis, he was in Brazil. Remember, this was the 70s, so care was very different than what it was now. And his parents, Alana and Harold Shepherd, wanted to bring him back to the States and have him a little bit closer for rehabilitation. So they got him stabilized in Brazil. It took a while to find an airfare, a flight that could bring him to the States. They were able to somehow get an Air Force aircraft that went down there, was able to bring him to the States. So he was in the States, was in a hospital, and it just wasn't quite the care that they were looking for. And they wanted something more in the Southeast because they were out of Georgia. And so they decided to take it upon themselves and create exactly what they wanted and what they felt their son needed. And so they created just very few beds. I believe it was 6 beds that they started with in 75. And that's how the Shepherd Center was born. And now we have over 200 beds. And so it's come extremely far. And they're always pushing the envelope when it comes to care. And now they're top 12 in the nation for rehabilitation hospitals. So when it comes to that, it's important to understand, where the backing of our program comes from. So fast forward to mid 2000s with OIF and OEF, we had all of our service members kind of coming back and with these invisible wounds that we weren't quite understanding. And so that's when Bernie Marcus, so one of the co-founders of Home Depot, huge philanthropist, and he saw what was going on. And he realized there's a gap with care in the community. Let's do something about this. So he approached the Shepherd Center and he said, hey, you guys are the best of what you do. We need to create something that's specifically for our service members and veterans coming back with these brain injuries. He funded it. When you throw a lot of money at a nonprofit hospital and say, hey, make this happen, and just who he is, especially in the Atlanta area, you don't turn that away, right? Like, what an incredible cause. And so Shepherd Center's Share Military Initiative started in 2008. We started just being able to see 8 individuals, and it's now grown to 20 we can see at one time. And so we've come a long way since 2008. We were the very first traumatic brain injury program that existed specifically for service members and veterans. And we've now been able to expand to first responders as well, which is incredible because they need it just as much.
Wow, that's incredible. Those are the stories that when we realize that there's a need in the community and we're not able to find what we need, just creating something out of nothing is, one of those worthwhile stories and needs to be shared more because of its importance. And I'm imagining the amount of help that it's had over the years.
What made you want to work with people that have experienced traumatic brain injuries?
So for me, just kind of growing up and just personally, I've always been very interested in our health and how we can improve our lives through that. And so when I was stationed with Wounded Warrior Battalion East in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, that was really the first time that I got to see how us as military and veterans were truly impacted by the things that we have done throughout our service. And so working there, I had friends who would come there and they were kind of going through the med board process to get medically separated, medically retired out of the Marine Corps. And we had Navy as well, some of our sailors. And seeing what that care looked like and how more so focused on medications and how medications can take care of these symptoms. And, oh, okay, this medication caused this additional symptom. Great, let's give you another medication for that. And so I had friends who were on 15, 17, 19, 20 medications. And that is not a long-term solution. And so that was really also when I learned more so about PTSD and traumatic brain injury. And so that was kind of my first experience with it and seeing how it was impacting our fellow service members and veterans. And then fast forward, I got the opportunity to work sort of as a non-clinical case manager for a veterans nonprofit and really got to dive into the challenges that transition brings with that and how there really is sort of a lack of services when it comes to a lot of these different challenges. I had the pleasure of being able to come back on active duty with Marine Corps' Wounded Warrior Regiment and really working in depth with these individuals who are transitioning out. So as soon as they transition out of the Marine Corps, that's when I got to start working with them for education, employment, getting connected with the VA, applying for combat-related special compensation, really anything and everything, and for them and their families. And then as we were having individuals come through with traumatic brain injury, we were able to get them connected with different resources. And that's how I first learned of Share Military Initiative and seeing how impactful it was and how it was truly saving lives and how it was being able to offer this care that most didn't even understand about traumatic brain injury because we don't learn about that in our service, right? We learn how to do our job. We learn how to be war fighters, depending on what branch. Like we learn how to be in the military. And what's left out is the challenges that come with that and what can come from deployment and what to do about that. And so really found myself kind of diving deep into the traumatic brain injury part of it. And that's how I learned of Share Military Initiative and different resources around the nation and really just had such great communication with Share, had such great feedback with those that we had sent to Share. And that's kind of how I got to where I am as far as experience wise. But then personally in 2010, my other half had deployed to Afghanistan, Corporal Kevin Cueto. And while they were out on a convoy, he was an O3, so infantry. So when they went out on a convoy and they were stopped and he ended up losing his life to an IED, improvised explosive device. So that really kind of brought it home because I knew that had he survived that, he would have likely probably had traumatic brain injury, likely would have had PTSD. There's no doubt that those that were, around him and with that situation are probably experiencing those things. So for me, I did not ever deploy. I kind of missed that boat when I first joined the Marine Corps. My unit was just deploying as I was attached to it. So I had missed that pre-deployment workup. And so for me, I feel that it's, my honor to be able to give back to those who did make that sacrifice and be able to help improve the lives of them and their families.
I know we're going to get into, the differences between PTSD and TBI in a moment, but one of the things that stood out when we were initially speaking back in February was that although TBI does tend to be associated with military members either being in an IED or something of that nature, you spoke to me that there are other situations, particularly in the Marine Corps, such as bar fights and things like that, that we often don't think about. We just think about TBI, that somebody concussed on the floor because of incoming or something of that nature. But that really stood out, that this could happen at any moment in your military career, that it doesn't necessarily have to happen in those circumstances.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I love that you mentioned that because you're right. So many don't understand that things outside of our training and deployments can also cause PTSD and traumatic brain injury. So that can be a car accident. That can be a bar brawl. Maybe they played soccer. Maybe they played football. even before they joined, even in high school, and had concussions. So really we take a look at, were there any concussions at any point in time? What was that caused by? Was that a car accident? What was the, mode of injury? And then what can we do to treat that?
Definitely. Can you explain the differences between traumatic and non-traumatic brain injuries and how they impact rehabilitation approaches?
Most of the time within veterans and service members, we think of those during deployments and those during training, but they can also occur from other things. So when you think about non-traumatic brain injuries, those are going to be more so of your strokes, your chemical exposures, potentially any cardiac issues that led to hypoxia, where just there wasn't enough oxygen getting to the brain. And so those can also cause brain injury. So those are going to be your non-traumatic brain injuries. And then your traumatic brain injuries are going to be more so focused on either like direct impact hits, your concussions caused from potentially blasts, and then also acceleration, deceleration injuries caused from like more so your car accidents.
Follow-up question to that. Is the treatment for one different than the other, being non-traumatic and traumatic, or is the same treatment?
It's going to be the same treatment. More so you're going to take a look at, is it mild or moderate or severe, and what comes with that. So what are those challenges that they're facing? And then what is going to be the individual treatments in order to kind of overcome those and work through those and help heal or retrain the brain to allow them to live a more independent life.
And they heal the same, correct? At the same pace is what I'm saying?
Yes, yeah. More so it just comes down to the symptoms that they have rather than the mechanism of injury.
Okay.
How does early intervention in complex case contribute to better outcomes in rehabilitations and recovery?
So there is data that early intervention does improve outcomes, but at Share Military Initiative, more of what we see are going to be your chronic injuries. So a lot of the times, either it's because the individual didn't know that they have traumatic brain injury, didn't quite understand it, or they just didn't have challenges to a level that made them feel like they need to reach out for help for it. And so what we're seeing is those chronic injuries that have been around for 10, 15, 20 years, and they're just now kind of doing something about it. So the treatments are a little bit different. So it definitely, the sooner that someone can get assistance and get care for and have that early intervention, it's going to have better outcomes just because they're not going to have the ability to have these maladaptive strategies. Whereas for someone who has had brain injury for a period of time, they have already kind of figured out ways to cope and strategies to work through these deficits. And a lot of times those strategies end up being maladaptive and not as healthy as what it could have been had they gotten early intervention. But when it comes to that, I think if you look at more so specifically the veteran space and the first responder space, so when you take a look at the veteran and the first responder populations, examples of that are going to be if there's sensory sensitivity, they might avoid being in public. If someone is trying to pull away from the community, they're going to start to isolate. And that's going to make things such as depression and anxiety only increase. So if we can assist with that and reduce their strategy of avoiding things, it's going to kind of play out and allow them to have better success and improve some of the other issues that they're going through.
What are other symptoms associated to chronic injuries, or somebody that's experiencing a TBI and doesn't realize that he or she has one?
That's a great question. Your more common symptoms that you're going to see are going to be your headaches and your migraines, dizziness problems, balance issues. So maybe someone they're sitting down watching TV and they got to stand up, and all of a sudden they start to lose balance. They kind of have to grab onto something real quick, and then after a few seconds, they can continue on. Nausea can happen, and that can sort of be a result of sensitivity to light and sound, which is another symptom that's going to be related to brain injury. And that nausea can be a result of also vision changes. So a lot of times when you see brain injury, it also has affected either the eyes or the pathways to the brain and the way that the brain receives that. And so vision changes are a fairly common one that we see. Depending on the part of the brain that was injured, it can be impulsivity and challenges with regulating emotions. So someone may get pissed off super quickly over something that isn't, or maybe something just becomes so overwhelming that they start to cry. And so these are a lot of symptoms that when we talk to individuals, they think that it's more normal until they come and like, oh, that's not a normal thing that everyone is experiencing. Oh, maybe I should get that looked at. Those are more so commonly the ones that we see.
I know you mentioned, like the isolation and other things like that. What are some of the other key challenges faced by people undergoing brain injury rehabilitation, and how does Shepherd Center address these challenges?
So the key challenge, right, is going to be if someone is trying to avoid certain symptoms, or they're trying to avoid certain situations that may make symptoms worse, and they start to isolate. Really, what we take a look at is what are those symptoms and how can we focus on addressing those deficits. So a big part of our program is going to be community reintegration. And so what we can do is, as someone is going through our program, if they have an individual session where they're working on something with a clinician, maybe that next hour or two is going to be focused on them going out into the community and actually practicing that and seeing how it works, or seeing what those challenges are. Maybe someone self-reports something a little bit differently than how they actually might react in public. And so they go with these clinicians out in public and go through different scenarios, and the clinician can actually see what are the strategies that they're using, what are the challenges that they're trying to work through, and then they can come back, and in the next individual session, they can take a look at, okay, this is what I saw, and let's address it in this sort of way. We also have group sessions, and so sometimes you have individuals in one setting, and maybe it can be a little bit more stressful than what someone has planned. So our program is really good about trying to think through those issues ahead of time and saying, okay, this is the potential situation. What are the challenges that can come from that? What's the different stimuli that might come into play during this situation? What are the different ways to react to that? And let's think things through a little bit, so that way when these moments come, you can make a better, more informed decision and how to react to it. Then they can go out in these different events. They can go forth with the reactions that they planned, whether that's, nope, I'm going to turn around and walk straight out. Nope, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to just breathe for a few minutes before I get up and go to this event. Our program is really great at being able to work with that community reintegration and then reduce those symptoms that may be causing that higher level of stress.
And that shows great commitment, because when you're dedicated enough to go out with that person that experienced that trauma and actually walk them through the process and make them feel as this is a doable action, I believe that it inspires more hope in them, because it's not the same for me. Like in my position, I can just encourage them to do it. It's not likely that they're going to go on themselves and be like, oh yeah, Mr. Ortiz told me to go and walk into a Walmart at noon or on a Saturday or something like that, and they'll be fine with it. It's not the same, because it'll probably be a bit more harder for them to go through it. Having somebody next to you, and actually observing and taking notes and looking for ways to help you out with it, I think that's amazing.
Yeah, another thing that our program focuses on too is the individual's goals. So we take a look at, okay, what are the challenges that they are going through and what are their goals? A lot of the times we have individuals come and their main goal may be to be a better family person. They're like, look, I am just not as engaged with my kids. I'm not as nice to them as I want to be. How can I have a better life with my family? Or maybe we have a service member who just transitioned and they're looking at going to school, or they're about to retire or about to get out and they're looking at going to school, and they know that they're having a hard time with their memory. They know they're having a hard time with organization. And so their goal when they come may be, how can I better succeed in school? How can I be more organized and not forget assignments? How can I be able to better retain the information that a professor talks about during these lectures? Or maybe it's employment. We're one of the only in the nation that works with active duty. Regardless of when they're getting out, they could be 5 years in and still have 15 years left. Maybe their goal is to be more prepared for deployment that's coming up, and they're having issues with headaches and migraines. If you're out in deployment and you have a migraine, there's nothing you can really do. Maybe you have a medication to take, but otherwise there's nothing to really work through. So if they can come to our program beforehand and be able to work with the clinicians to reduce those symptoms and figure out better ways to cope and better ways to work through these challenges, then they're going to be safer for themselves and safer for others around them when they do deploy. Or maybe they're looking for the next chapter for employment. They can come in and really figure out what's important to them, where are environments where they're going to succeed potentially, and they're going to enjoy these specific jobs. And we have someone on staff who does vocational rehabilitation. And so if someone is wanting that and wants to take a look at that next chapter, he can sit down and figure out, what are you going to enjoy? What does that look like? What does that training look like? And then, oh, okay, great. That means more school. Okay, let's take a look at how to better prepare for school while you're here and really set them up for long-term success.
Could you elaborate on the personalized approach to long-term recovery at Shepherd Center? How does clinicals tailor rehabilitation plans to individual patients' needs?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think long-term recovery is really the focal point of our program and really what we want to make sure individuals have. Because if they come to our program and they're great for a year and then things start to get worse, then there wasn't much point of them coming to our program, right? And so long-term recovery is truly what we want to focus on. So as they're going through our program, each clinician is going to put them through different testing and figure out kind of what is going on. With that, they're also going to combine that with what their goals are. So like I said, whether that's school, whether it's being a better family person, and that's truly going to dictate the plan. So it's very different for everyone when they come. The treatment is very individualized for each person. That also means that it's a different length and stay as well. So someone may come and be recommended for 2 weeks, whereas someone may be recommended for 14 weeks. It just depends. And it also depends on if they're available. If someone can't do 10 weeks, they can only do 2, then we'll do everything we can in 2. Another part of that is our transition. So once someone finishes and graduates our program, they have a clinician that's with them for another 12 months. So we have what's called a transition support team, and they will work with them for 12 months. They'll fly out to wherever they are, whether that's Puerto Rico, whether it's Alaska, whether that's Maine. That clinician will go to wherever they're at, go to their home if they'd like to, do education with the family, make sure the family is the best kind of prepared and that they have support that's needed. They can go with them to a VA appointment and help advocate for them. If someone needs continuing services beyond once they have left our program and go back home, the clinicians can help find that resource in their community and connect them to it, and then follow up and be like, hey, how's it going? How's everything going? We planned for your transition to look like this. How has it actually turned out? Is there anything that we can kind of adjust and make sure that we focus a little bit more on moving forward? And so having that year-long transition, and it's flexible. Some people after a few months are like, I'm good. I don't need someone checking in on me. Okay, great. Some people may need a little bit longer than a year. And either way, they know that they have someone that they can reach out to. Because our program also, say a couple years later, someone, maybe they've gotten divorced, maybe they moved to a new state, maybe they have switched jobs entirely, and all these stressors have brought up these symptoms again and kind of made some of these symptoms worse. If they want to come back, we welcome them back. They can come back. We call it a tune-up. Usually ends up being a shorter period of time because they've already worked through most of the things. They're just kind of fine-tuning things for their new situation. And they can come back, do maybe like a few weeks or however long, and be able to go back home. And we welcome that because we want that long-term success for them. And so we're very personalized in our approach, and our clinicians really do tailor it to what each individual person needs and their family.
I think that part goes overlooked so many times because we focus on the veteran and we forget that they have to go home and do this with their family. And their family, if they're not involved in the process, they're not going to know what to do. Many veterans, I've spoken to them, and afterwards I'll meet their spouses, and their spouses will be like, once he gets home, he forgot everything that was told in his appointment. So if they're not included in this process, then a lot of the information that's being put out probably won't be followed up on as it should. And the recovery process will just be setbacks and, doing something good and then another setback because it's not being followed through as it should be. So to have the family members involved or to have somebody come and advocate for them at the VA, as you mentioned, that's a win right there.
Yeah, and we try to include the families as much as the individual will allow, because that's their support system when they get back home after they leave the Share Military Internship Program in Atlanta. They're going to go back to wherever they live, and they're going to have their family or their support system, whether that's friends, whether it's roommates, whatever it may be. And so it's important for those individuals to also understand. And so we welcome anyone to join their sessions as much as the individual will allow. And when they go through the program, when they graduate, they come up with what's called a wellness plan. And it's a plan that they go through with all the different clinicians and figure out, what does wellness look like? And when you're not doing well, what does that look like? And how do you get yourself back to well? And so it's sort of a contingency plan, like, okay, great. You may think things are going to go wonderfully, but what does it look like when you're not doing well? And what things work to help you get back to being in a spot of wellness? And they can also take this home and share this with their families, so that their families can see this and understand and help support it as well. And for those who come to our program, we offer them an apartment. And in the apartment, they can have 2 guests stay with them. So if they have a spouse and maybe a child who wants to come and live with them for the entire time, and that spouse wants to come and join in on some of their individual sessions, we absolutely welcome that. And so you're right, it's such a big portion. And I think it does get overlooked a lot with different treatments that are out there. That family is such an important aspect.
What's the longest that they could stay in the program or that you've seen?
14 weeks is the longest I've seen. Our average is about 7 to 8 weeks, but it just depends on each person's. We have had some that were here a little bit longer, and that was because something happened back home. Maybe a pipe burst back home and they had to go back home and they had to tend to that. Maybe something happened to a family member and they had to go home. Maybe it was a child's graduation, and so they left to go back home and be a part of that and then resume the treatment. And so while the treatment may have been a shorter amount of time, they were there for longer just because we have that flexibility, or we can do that. If they need to step away for something, we encourage them to do that. Or if an active duty service member or reservist has training that they need to go to, maybe for 2 weeks, we encourage them to leave, go do that training, and then come back, which is also a really great example to figure out, hey, how did things go when you were gone? Okay, take everything you learned in the program, put that in an actual, like, real life scenarios and situations with your family, whatnot. And now that you're back, how can we adjust that to make it better for you, when you do return home? And so we do encourage them while they're going through to at some point return home, even if it's just for a week before they graduate, in order to understand kind of what that looks like at home and adjust as needed before they officially graduate and go back home.
That's awesome. Can you share any success stories of someone who has received services at the Shepherd Center?
Yeah, I mean, the success stories are so many because we've had over 900 that we've worked with. And so the stories that we have heard and the family members who reached out, it's just incredible. One I can think of, a Marine that I worked pretty closely with, as he was, so his time in the Marine Corps, it was very early on with Iraq. And during that, they had individuals that they assigned to be part of a team that processed remains. And so he was a part of that team. And so not only did he have severe PTSD, because that's what they did, they processed remains, and other Marines around them saw them as bad luck because that was their job and their duty. And so not only were they having to go through these scenarios, but then they were also being somewhat ostracized from the rest of the community that they were a part of because of what they did. And being around that, just, it was Iraq. It was early on. There was a lot of explosions. They were around. And so many of them had TBI and PTSD, which you do if the traumatic brain injury is caused from time in service. Very often TBI and PTSD are closely aligned. Not always, but sometimes. And so he struggled with both and got out, had a really rough transition. He sort of had a rough upbringing before even joining the Marine Corps, and then joined the Marine Corps and had a rough time in the Marine Corps. And traumatic brain injury a lot of times is not diagnosed. Like I said before, like, we don't learn about that. And so the treatment for PTSD and the treatments for traumatic brain injury are very different. Traumatic brain injury is very clinical in nature. Everything that we do is evidence-based, and it's a lot of retraining of the brain and doing different things. And so he was trying to overcome some of these challenges and symptoms through PTSD treatment, and it wasn't working. And so finally he was able to get connected with Cher and was able to come to Cher and was just a superstar. Like, he was incredible. Really, everyone we have in our program is just so incredible. It's such a positive environment. It's truly a place of hope. And so he got there and was able to work through a lot of these things and then graduated. And now he focuses on helping others and is a mentor for others and getting them connected with different care. And he's in such a better place now. And we hear a lot of stories about suicide ideation and suicide attempts and how people had lost that hope. And then they come and they get to see, like, wow, this team truly cares. They really are able to help me overcome challenges that I never thought could be overcome, and then be able to really put them on a path to a new life and really help them find that joy within life. And so we hear a lot of stories of overcoming, and people are like, hey, I thought that my life wasn't worth it before, and now I realize that I am worth it and that I can enjoy life, and my family does want me around. My friends do want me around. And so we hear a lot of stories of that, which is incredible. You couldn't ask for more than that.
How many of those cases do you think, estimating or guesstimating, go misdiagnosed because of the similarities between PTSD and TBI?
I would say a majority. If they are receiving care for PTSD, a lot of the times we get referrals from their clinicians who are able to recognize that there's a difference between the TBI and the PTSD, but a lot of times there isn't. And so many people don't even go and get care for any other mental health. And it doesn't have to be PTSD. It can be anxiety. It can be depression. Really, all of that we can assist with. We do have behavioral health on staff who can work through some of those things. We do see when they come to us, maybe that level of anxiety is at this certain level. And when they leave, it's reduced. So we see a lot of improvement when it comes to other mental health outside of TBI, even though that may have not been what they came with. But we see a lot of it get misdiagnosed just because the knowledge isn't out there. The awareness isn't out there. And being able to recognize and identify the difference, especially with the symptoms, is not commonly known. And so we see it far too often than what it should be.
The last question is pretty much, we would like to know how people can apply or request the services. What is the criteria for someone to receive services, and what is the process? They pretty much, if we have someone or we want to self-apply to the program on the services, how can they do that?
Yes, the criteria, we work specifically with post 9/11. Outside of that, if they serve post 9/11, it doesn't matter to us what the discharge status is. It doesn't matter if they served maybe 10 days and then they were discharged from boot camp or basic training because of an injury. As long as they served a day after September 11th, 2001, which classifies as post 9/11, then we can work with them. And really what we focus on is those symptoms. So it doesn't have to be diagnosed, doesn't have to be from time in service, but if they serve after 9/11 and they have symptoms of brain injury, then that is exactly who we work with. And most of the time we see mild to moderate traumatic brain injuries. Many of those which they don't even realize that they have brain injury until they're like, oh, these are the symptoms. I have all of those. Maybe I should come in for an evaluation. And so that can come online. We have our shepherd.org. That's SHEPHERD.org/share, SHARE. They can go on there. They can inquire. If someone wants to refer, myself and my colleague AJ can assist with that process. And so we get referrals all the time. We'll have maybe someone who went through the program and they'll reach out and say, hey, my buddy now wants to do this, and we'll reach out and be able to help them. But online is going to be the best way. They can also call our office at 404-603-4314. And that way they can talk to Dina, is one of our shared missions, and she's incredible. And so if they're interested and they want more information to see if it's a good fit for them, we want to make sure that Share is a good fit for everyone who takes a look at it. And if Share isn't the best fit, whether they go through the application and process or not, we will always get them to a resource that might be a better fit for them. Or maybe someone needs to focus on PTSD a little bit first. We can get them over to a PTSD program and then have them come to us afterwards. And so we are always taking a look at what's going to be the best for that individual for their long-term success. And so they can reach out online. They can reach out through the phone number. If someone wants to refer them, they can reach out on their behalf, and we're happy to connect with them and do everything that we can.
The program sounds great. For our listeners, in our episode description, we're going to have the link and Alexandria's number as well. If anybody's interested and knows somebody that could actually benefit from this program, I highly recommend that you do reach out to Alexandria and let her know, what the needs are. And from what we've heard, I'm pretty sure that they're going to help you out and look for ways to help you out. So, Alexandria, thanks for doing this with us. We really appreciate it. And of course, thank you for your service and thank you for what you do for everybody in the Marine Corps and in the military. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. Like I said, it's truly been my honor. And I think it's up to us to assist each other and make sure that we're taken care of outside of the military. And so it's an honor truly to be on here, to be able to help out our brothers and sisters.
Definitely. Last question. Will you be coming back to Puerto Rico to the IW hike or?
Absolutely. That was my first IW hike and it was a blast. It was so much more than I could have imagined. So I will definitely have it in the works for next year.
Okay, so next time come with some more Marines. So this time, we could see if the tug of war is at least a little more challenging for us Army guys. So
I've also started working to refresh my Spanish. So if I keep it up, maybe next time we can do this podcast in Spanish.
Awesome. We look forward to that. So thanks again for doing this with us, okay?
Awesome. Thank you guys. Appreciate
Thank you.
Una mujer con una autoestima sólida, reconocemos y valoramos nuestros logros, manteniendo una actitud positiva hacia nuestras habilidades y capacidades. También creo que aceptamos a sí mismas con compasión, con comprendimiento que es normal tener imperfecciones y que estas no definen lo que valemos, ¿no? La autoestima saludable implica establecer límites saludables en las relaciones, expresar nuestras necesidades de manera asertiva y cultivar un sentido positivo de identidad y propósito en la vida. Para todas las mujeres que nuestra autoestima puede estar debilitada, es fundamental comenzar conociendo y desafiando los pensamientos negativos. Practicar la autocompasión y reemplazar la autocrítica con afirmaciones positivas puede ser un primer paso muy crucial. Buscar apoyo emocional a través de amistades, familiares, profesionales de la salud, para mí ha sido valiosísimo, pues también pueden ser beneficiosos para abordar las raíces subyacentes de la baja autoestima. Fomentar el autocuidado, tanto físico como emocional, el hecho de caminar, el hecho de hasta sacar a pasear al perrito, esas cosas nos ayudan mucho. También establecer metas realistas contribuyen a un desarrollo gradual de una autoestima más sólida. La participación en actividades que traigan alegría, logros personales, también fortalecen la percepción positiva de sí misma. En última instancia, cultivar una autoestima saludable implica un proceso continuo de autodescubrimiento, autocuidado y desarrollo personal. Y definitivamente recuerda que un buen día para cuidar de tu salud mental es hoy.
Queremos compartir que seguiremos nuestra serie conmemorando el mes de la historia de la mujer. Nuestro próximo episodio será una conversación con Chaplain Maritza Curet, que nos estará compartiendo unos tips para aumentar nuestros niveles espirituales, entre otras cositas. Para apoyar nuestro proyecto pueden ir a nuestra página de Facebook y darle like. También nos pueden seguir en Instagram y YouTube para contenido adicional. Y por último, solo falta decir,
Gracias por tu servicio. No, I'm good.
I'm sorry, I lost you.
Yeah, sure. Okay.